Thank you so much. Hello and welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for your service to our communities. I have the utmost respect for your work and everything that you do, from dispatch to detectives to firefighters to law enforcement and detective units and street units. Your presence here today really speaks to your resiliency and your recognition of how important it is to have first responder health and wellness. And I'm so honored to be in this all-star lineup today as we come together to support BluePaz and this annual First Responder Health and Wellness Conference on the platform that's international. I think that's amazing. And I'm so excited, just like you are, to hear the rest of our speakers. This just isn't about the speakers themselves, but engaging with each other. So I'm hoping that you enjoy my presentation. I don't know if it's going to be as dynamic as Inspector Conrad's, but I hope that you'll enjoy it. So my name is Nina Delgadillo, and I'm a retired federal agent. I was an agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And I spent 20 years, 25 years with ATF. And and then I moved on to become the director of Safe Schools, a risk manager. And currently I'm the director of safety and emergency preparedness for Panthera 7. And earlier in my career, I really uncovered some deeper insights about myself and the strength that it required for me to persevere. You know, being a female in law enforcement presented some different challenges at times, and I'm going to share some of those with you. So key to my journey has been the invaluable support of mental health services, which is why I'm so happy to be here today. It significantly contributed to building my confidence and my lifelong resiliency. And by sharing some of my journey, I hope to empower others to their path of resiliency. So today I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Dara, because of his unwavering commitment to first responder health and wellness. I know that if you've had a chance to ever meet Dr. Dara in person, he is an incredible person. Him and Tava and Sarita, all his family are just some of the most genuine people you'll ever meet, but they're so committed to helping others. And so I just can't say enough about them. I had to put a slide in there. So we all know that health and wellness are vital to how we as first responders navigate careers and our lives. But, you know, coming to health and wellness starts very early in life. So I want to kind of take you through my journey, and I'm going to provide an informative perspective on my experiences, the insight on how my journey contributed to my self-confidence and lifelong resiliency. And I hope to, like I said, empower others. I'm going to talk about some deeper insights, and some of it might be a little bit raw because I've never done this before. I've been teaching for 37 years, and I don't think I've ever, I'm not worried about a presentation, but ever thought so much about a presentation as I did for this presentation, because it's very personal. I'm going to show you how I walked this bridge to where I am in my life right now. So these are some stages of my journey. I put these pictures up because if you look on the far left, this is me growing up, and I'm the little one. And you can see by my father's standing in his position that he was a very strict military man, and he I was raised by him, and he was raised by his mother, his aunt, and two sisters. His father passed away early in Germany. And, you know, Dad passed away recently. So if I take a pause every now and then, if I speak of him, I might be a little bit emotional because it's so fresh. But it's important to talk about Dad and what he did for me in my life, and also some things that he did that affected my life. Um, Dad was surrounded by a lot of women, so he always hoped that I would be a boy. And he, you know, was picked out a name. And guess what? I wasn't a boy. When I was born, he chose to call me what? Tiger. He raised me to be disciplined, respectful, honest, hardworking, and dependable, with a lot of other quality virtues. You know, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. That's how he raised me. But along with those values, he also instilled the importance of, of what he called never appearing weak. So never to cry in front of other people and to mask those emotions because they could be viewed by others as weakness. It became like a badge of honor to me to be able to hide my emotions whenever I was hurt or wanted to cry. The terms suck it up or you're fine, you'll be fine were just ingrained in my DNA. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with those terms and probably have used those terms. And when we look to the far right, you see when I was hired by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, it was alcohol, tobacco, and firearms back then, it's and explosives now. I was so proud to tell my father that I would be the first female agent in Sacramento and the 50th in the United States for this agency. And he reminded me of the lessons he taught me growing up. Remember, don't show emotions and to don't show weakness. So at the time, I was also raised by my mother. You can see that my mother is Japanese, Japanese by birth. She was culturally very different from my father. She taught me the enormous strength in humbleness, to have empathy for others, and how the value of giving is so much more important than the value of receiving. And so while they seemed like they were miles apart from each other in the way they looked and acted, I realized that people that were different like they were, but still a couple, could be very valuable and could teach me very valuable lessons. And I used those lessons throughout my life. And I was able to navigate a lot of challenges later in life with values that I learned from each of them. So now I talk about, you know, my also my law enforcement family. My husband is seated there, and he's the rock of my life. My son is in the picture. This was a Mother's Day gift to me, but they meant a lot to me in my life, and they would frame some of the later things that I went through in my life. During the first 6 years of my job, I worked on a lot of investigations that dealt with death. My first fatal bombing was Theodore Kaczynski's serial bombing campaign, later known as the Unabomb investigation. Many of you might have heard of this investigation. Hugh Scruton was a computer businessman here in Sacramento and was the first of two victims in the Sacramento area that were part of the serial bomber's reign of terror. And that was my first bomb. This would become part of a 17-year investigation that I would work on throughout my career. I was involved with numerous other bombing investigations and resulted in serious injuries or deaths. And investigations that involved violent offenders. ATF went after the worst of the worst. And many of those violent offenders had created horrific acts of violence, some involving children. That was very difficult. Each time there was a trauma involved, and I learned and I worked with victims and had to interview victims, I told myself, I'm fine. So how many of us have really said this? I really did feel like I was fine, though. I thought even though these acts of violence were so foreign to me and how I grew up, I didn't hear about violence like that. I didn't struggle. I thought, I'm fine. This is what I'm destined to do, to help people, to protect people. I didn't struggle until 1991. And I call that the storm ahead. At this point, I'm going to share some vivid memories of a traumatic shooting incident. And I want to allow anyone joining us who may be triggered by this sharing to put me on mute if you need to. And you can watch the slides and then jump back in when you feel like it. Give yourself permission. It's actually one of the things that I have learned throughout my career is to give myself permission to tap out. So on the day in 1991, it was another day in the office. And many people think federal agents have really exciting jobs and that every day is exciting because of what you see on TV. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It is an exciting job, but there are many days when you're preparing case reports, which are legal documents that will help you prepare for a federal prosecution. And that's what I was doing in the office that day. And while I was sitting there, I heard what I thought was an argument going on. I could hear people yelling at each other. And then I heard a single gunshot. And initially I thought, That must have been an accidental discharge. It had to have been. We were in the office. So it occurred in the office directly behind me. And then someone said, "Oh shit," excuse my language. Then an eerie silence followed by voices in the office, including mine, that shouted, "Everyone's okay? What's going on? What was that?" So I went out of my office toward the office behind me, and with another agent, we opened the door, and I saw one of the agents on the phone with a 911 operator, and the other agent was lying on the floor with a gunshot wound to the head. I saw a weapon on the desk by the phone, and I knew the younger agent was deceased. Mayhem ensued. Life flight arrived at the office, and the local police and first responders arrived in mass. We were in a business building, and so it garnered a lot of attention immediately. I guided the life flight and all the first responders through the office. My supervisor asked me later to go to the home of the agent that was later charged with the shooting and instructed me to inform his wife that he had been arrested. I did this. I want to read this excerpt to you because it's a little bit small, but it's a good account. A federal agent who put a loaded gun to a colleague's head to show he had nothing to be despondent about. And it goes on to say that the agent must have understood the risk involved. And prosecutors said that Herzog, who was the shooter, apparently was counseling Brown about his personal problems and that he used a shock technique. He basically played roulette with a revolver. And there was a fight and struggle ensued and the gun went off. And that's when it happened. That's when the weapon went off and he shot the other agent in the head. And it was a very difficult time. And I call it what happened in the storm. It was a lot to go through at the time. The way that some of us process what happened that day, the trauma and the grief, varied so greatly. ATF offered us grief counseling, and what did I say? I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm fine." And the next 3 weeks went by in a blur. I arranged a mass funeral for law enforcement, which if you've ever been to one and know how massive that is and what an undertaking that is, it was with all the bells and whistles, with the flyovers, with you know all the accoutrements that should be given to sworn officers. The next 3 weeks went by in a flash. Um, I had to engage with the family of the agent that was charged, and I also engaged with the family of the agent that died. And and that really consumed me for 3 to 4 weeks. And I thought I was okay. Um, in the next 3 or 4 weeks, I never shed a tear. I just every day I had a plan, knew what I had to get done, and I would do it. I didn't allow myself to show that weakness, that maintaining that badge of honor that my father had always told me about and that I really believed in. And perhaps part of it was because I was the only female agent in the office, and I never was going to appear like I was weak or that I couldn't handle the situation or that I needed time off because I was grieving. But what occurred next was really unexpected. People in our office, agents and support staff, began to share different feelings about the shooting. And the arrest of the popular agent, he was a senior agent in the office, very popular, and also feelings about the agent that was killed. And grief took on a really different picture. And this was really uncharted territory for me and for everyone. I learned later of a great resource, David Kessler, and he is a founder of grief.com. And it's a resource that basically helps people with uncharted territory related to grief. And I'm going to talk about different types of grief and different situations that I've been in, but uncharted territory made my grief just a bit different. And there's another book that he wrote with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on grief and grieving that I would highly suggest. And they're resources that, later in life would really help. I'm skipping ahead just a little bit. ATF management advised all the agents that were involved in that were assigned to the office that we would be expected to then attend a mandatory grief counseling in the near future. And I was trying to think of all the reasons why I shouldn't attend. And about 4 weeks after the shooting, I received a call from my father, and he said 5 simple words to me. He said, "How are you doing, Tiger?" I completely lost it. I lost my mind. I wailed and cried and heaved more than I had my entire life. And it was so odd to me because it took his voice to unleash this wave of emotion for me. And I realized then that that grief counseling was going to be a huge challenge that I wasn't sure that I was prepared for. So part of my difficulty in the grieving process was that I never expected to have a violent and traumatic fatal shooting in my office, a place that I felt was safe, right? Not in a search warrant, not of a suspect, and not during any undercover role that I was participating in, but in my office where I felt safe. And as a first responder, training's everything, right? It provides you with empowerment to deal with situations. It was not one that I ever expected to happen. So when this horrific shooting occurred in my office with the fellow agents, I had no tools or training to draw upon. And that made my grief a challenge in itself. The resiliency that I built did not help me to address this. The media attention and the criticism was also a factor. And it stayed a factor for time to come. We would hear comments like, are you ATF agents playing with guns in the office? It was difficult to respond and to defend myself or defend the office or our agency because there was also a criminal prosecution at hand. And did not and could not respond to these statements. But they were hurtful nevertheless. They impacted us. And the support that we received from fellow agencies did help us through this challenging time. And that's what this collective, I think, is about too, is helping each other through difficult times and hearing stories about how we are able to survive and become resilient. I ultimately attended that council. And guess what? I had an epiphany. I realized I wasn't fine. I had suppressed emotions like I had my entire life. I wasn't sleeping. I had no desire to eat, and I love food, pastara. I was somewhat disconnected emotionally. And this was especially difficult because I was planning for my wedding. I had never put 2 and 2 together to see that my body was reacting to grief in a way that I was not familiar with. I had never been exposed to, I'd never been trained on. So through counseling, I learned ways to process the grief and the trauma. So then I moved on from ATF and I started my second career in school safety and emergency preparedness and later threat management. I was a director of safe schools. We had 4,300 students and 77 school sites throughout the Sacramento region, the city and the county. I was so blessed to have a team of incredible sworn officers. And we led the team through community engagement. It was like my new everything. And although we were extremely proactive and we were able to mitigate risks, great and small, every day, we probably had an average of 33 to 35 calls of service in a day. And you can imagine some of those calls including homicides, sexual assaults of children, bomb threats, and armed robberies. We were in a lot of inner city schools. We had one particular year that was extremely challenging for the team. We lost a number of children through trauma, and they were through trauma at home. They were victims in accidents, in drive-bys, victims of child sex trafficking. And we also experienced a high degree of suicidal students, students that had suicidal ideation, and they needed assessment and mental health support services. And really, while there was no way for us to foresee some of their situations, we did what we could to support them and their families. We partnered with community therapists to provide free services to those in need. We would secure rides for them to go to medical appointments so that they could receive services they need. I think that we really were committed to being engaged with our community and our students and our staff, to do more than we to do the most that we could, I guess we should say. And because of that, we were able to, we were recognized by different entities. And it's really kind of difficult for me to share some of these awards. I'm proud of the team awards. I'm extremely proud of the team awards. But I want you to see that there is a dynamic going on where on one side of the picture, we're receiving all these accolades, and on the other side of the spectrum, what's really happening behind the scenes. So this picture was taken at the state assembly in California, the state capitol, and our entire team was recognized for the Office of Safe Schools and our team of school resource officers for all the work that we had done to mitigate risks and to keep our kids and our staff and students safe. We were also recognized by the state assembly and other threat management and other organizations like SRO organizations for our commitment to campus safety. And as you well know, when you receive accolades from your peers, it holds a different value than it does from the community. It's always an honor to get an award or to be recognized, but to get one from your own peers, it speaks volumes. Then I was also fortunate to be recognized individually by the city of Sacramento and the mayor for the Champion of Excellence Award. And you can see here in this picture that on the left is someone that you'll meet again later in the presentation, Sharon. And to the right, Lisa Hines, one of my closest friends who was a captain at the time. And behind me is Mindy. She was one of the law enforcement chaplains who had been at many scenes in my life. For mental health for officers, and she just was a tremendous resource and advocate for police officers and law enforcement and all first responders, really. And so this was one of the recognitions I received. The next one was called an Unsung Hero Award. And this was a little bit difficult for me to receive because I don't feel like I'm a hero. I feel like I have a great job that I was fortunate to do. I got presented with a cape. It was really a special award. And what happened was it made me feel, people would call me Superwoman. And this really comes to head one night when I'm out, because I was a call me 24 hours a day if it's one of our babies manager. That's what I know that's a long term, but for the dispatch, you know that if you can get a hold of somebody on a night and in a weekend to take care of an issue, that for a dispatcher, that's going to be really important, right? Because you're trying to address an issue, whether it's a suicidal student who posts something on Facebook and you need to find out who the student is, where they are, how we can find out if they're okay. The dispatch for the city and the county knew me by first name. They knew me intimately. They called me for requests at least 4 nights of the week. I went back to my pattern of I'm fine, I've got this, I can take care of all of this. I was so proud that all the first responders in the area knew that I was dependable and that I would respond 24/7. And I really, when I think about Inspector Conrad's comments about being the person that needs to respond to everything, I didn't think I was the only one, but I wanted to be the one, right? I love that adrenaline. I love that responsibility. I love the stress. And I think it's important to understand that because in law enforcement and all first responders, whether you're fire or law enforcement, counselors, we want to be there when people need us. And it's that old adage, I've got your six. So when I received that Unsung Hero Award, it started kind of a change with my thinking. I remember one night I was at dinner with friends. My cell phone rang again, my work cell phone. And it was a notification that something had happened to another one of my students after hours. And they needed help. They needed help getting a hold of the student, figuring out where the student lived, and so forth. And so I went back to the dinner table and I apologized to my friends and I said, I have to excuse myself. I've got something that's going on that I need to really pay attention to at work. And their comment was, "You're such a superwoman." And I've heard this throughout my career, but my response was different this time. It, my response was as my verbal response was, "I'm not a hero. I just do something different than that you do, than most people really understand." But this time when I heard it, I felt different inside, like I was undeserving. And from the outside, I appeared grateful and strong, that image that I always wanted to portray. But inside, I was sad, I was frustrated, I was helpless that I couldn't help the children. And I felt helpless that I couldn't protect those students in their own homes, in their safe space. Now, does that ring a bell with what I talked about earlier? It absolutely does. I later noticed that the trigger was similar to how I felt about the shooting in my safe space, my office, and how I felt about these children that were being hurt or killed in their own homes. And I began to experience an elevated blood pressure. I couldn't sleep. I became emotionally detached at home. I finally reached out to one of my closest friends, the firefighter that I showed you in the previous picture. And she's a member of the First Responder Chaplaincy and a peer support team. And I have tremendous respect for her, and she knows me very well. And so what I would do is I would find out her schedule and we would talk at the hours where she was in the firehouse at odd hours when everyone else is sleeping because I knew her schedule. And guess what? No one would know. It was under the cloak of secrecy that I was talking to her, that any weakness that I might show would only be known to her. So as time went on, I didn't seek additional mental health support because I thought I had it under control, but I didn't. One day at work, I experienced an intense heartbeat and I called her and said, "Hey, this is what's going on." I took my pulse and she advised me to call 911 right away. And what did I do? I refused. I said, "I'm in my office. There is no way in Hades that I'm calling 911 while I'm in the office. Not going to happen." And I look at it later and I I think about this I think about this slide. Dara, my slide's not advancing. Here it is. Brene Brown and the Power of Vulnerability. And she talks about vulnerability being the core of shame and fear as we struggle for our worthiness. But it's also the birthplace of joy and creativity. And she pushes us to see the vulnerability as courage, not weakness. Boy, I wish I would have known that before, right? I looked at vulnerability as a sign of shame. Absolutely, 100%. And that's why I started struggling so far. Sharon and I finally agreed that I would go to the firehouse to see her. And she is what I call my 911 lifeline. This is Sharon in the middle, and Sharon on the right at the fire station where I would often go. Um, I finally went to the firehouse to see her. Um, she hooked me up on an EKG and she told me that I needed immediate medical assistance, like serious medical assistance. And we ended up both in an ambulance and I ended up going to the hospital. And that was my wake up call. I finally agreed that I needed to see a mental health therapist who she recommended that specialized in first responder therapy. The other therapies I had received throughout my career were therapists, good therapists that ATF provided. They were not first responder therapists, very different. This therapy changed my life, full stop. And through those experiences, I've built a stronger core resilience. I've been able to recognize when an event triggers memories and emotions, and I use the tools that I learned and put them in the toolbox to navigate the situation. These are some of the takeaways that I'd like to share about my journey. To share my weakness is to make yourself vulnerable, and to make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. I think that is powerful, and I absolutely love that, and I tell that to people all the time. I learned that the body grieves, but our minds try to avoid it or try to explain it. And in my different challenges with grief, I learned that grief isn't packaged with a pretty bow. It's hard, it's harsh, and it comes and goes when you least expect it. There is no one size fits all. And some speak of stages, but it's really important to know that everybody grieves differently and they grieve differently at different times. And that's something that was huge for me, even recently when my father passed. I also learned it's important to find the right therapist, one that you can relate to, one that knows how you feel about the appearance of weakness, right? When you're a first responder, the last thing you ever want to show people is that you have any kind of weakness. You want that Teflon armor, right? Therapists and mental health professionals who work primarily with first responders will have a unique skill set. They speak our language, right? I was able to share how difficult it was to seek counseling clothed in secrecy for a second time in my life. Now, remember, my husband and my son were law enforcement officers, and while my husband knew and completely supported my therapy, I never shared it with my son. I regret it to this day. He's retired now, and he had gone through some shootings in his career. And I did tell him to seek therapy. I really never talked about my weaknesses, but he also saw the value of what that was like. There's some other skills that I feel like some tools that I put into my toolbox to rely on. I talk about the therapy specializing in first responders, right? I talk about faith. Faith really helped me get through things. If you've ever had the occasion to speak with a therapist or a chaplain that is primarily for first responders, they can help you and connect you back with your faith and really be there for you when you need it most. I talk about meditation. I grew up with a Buddhist mom, and meditation is very much a part of my lifestyle. So meditation was really important for me, and I kind of went back to that. And then I also did something that I've done throughout my career for more than 30 years. I do a lot of volunteering. I've volunteered for Cops and Kids for more than 30 years. I also have recently, in the last 2 years, started working with the Girls Fire Camp. And part of that is my urge to continue giving back to the community in a different way. But it's also a way to help build resiliency with these young people, to get them prepared for the types of careers that they want to go into, and the fact that mental health is so important. So, starting at an early time and explaining that it's okay to have emotions, that it's okay to seek therapy, it's so important. So, in both of these spectrums, I think that I was able to, really talk about how mental health takes a part in your entire careers. And really, when I look at my family, I can tell you that this person in the middle with me is my husband. He's the rock in my life. And to the left is my immediate family, my three children, my husband and I, and of course my two furry ones. And to the right, my extended family. And it's important to see that you have all of these things going on, but your family is also affected too. And maybe some of the things that we can talk about with Dara in a moment will help you in the way some of the things that I had to navigate through with family might be helpful to you. Um, and when I talk about resiliency, I talk about perseverance, no matter what the odds. The odds can change, the odds will change, and you can have different types of challenges during your careers. And I hope that as you build your resilience, that you can set boundaries with yourself, that you can remember to give yourself permission to tap out. You know, it's something that I heard from Inspector Conrad when he talked about the fact that sometimes it's hard to sit back and not be the person all the time that needs to, to get the job done. There's other people that can get the job done and they can do the job just as well as you can. It's just that our personalities sometimes, a personality says that we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to get this done. Well, give yourself permission. I love all these thumbs up. Thank you so much. Let others step in and step into your life, not just your work, but your life. That's tremendous, tremendous importance in my life. Let others handle what you feel compelled to do. Remembering or reminding yourself that others are just as capable. Um, that's hard to do. That's hard to do when you want to save the world. And I know many of you feel like that. And so I just want you to know that you can be vulnerable. It's important to be vulnerable. We often mask ourselves by ourselves and our emotions by staying busy, but allowing yourself to like step back, to enjoy life, and to focus on ourselves, to focus on our families, and other things besides work, is important, and to recognize that you don't have to be strong all the time, right? It's important to be strong. You don't have to be strong all the time. So through the grief and trauma, the trauma and grief in my life, I found by recognizing these insights about myself and what I can do to help others work through grief and trauma, I've built a more resilient self, one that's helped me in situations and emotions that I didn't expect. When I look at the different things that have happened in my life, I always look at, before the storm, during the storm, and this is after the storm. After the storm is when you've taken your life lessons and you say, these are things that I can do so that I can see that double rainbow. And you will, you absolutely will. Um, Take the time to do some of the things that we've mentioned, and take some of the time to be that what we call grace under fire. Winston Churchill said, courage is grace under fire. It's not the absence of fear. It's about being able to do what you can when you're afraid. And that's a huge concept for me. I never wanted to show I was afraid. But you know what? It's called Grace Under Fire. And there was a card recently, and I know it's kind of funny that it's from a card, but an author named Susie Toronto wrote a card, and she called it Grace Under Fire. And part of it was so incredible. I just wanted to share it with you. And it says, and this is talking to someone who looks at having grace under fire, right? So I want you to know that I'm here. While I may not be able to solve your problems, I can promise you this. You won't have to face them alone, whether it's an ear to listen, a hand to share your labors, or just someone you can lean on. I can be anything you need me to be. Because even grace under fire could be someone who needs a little help sometime. So if what I've shared today resonates with you and you want to have a deeper conversation, please reach out to me or others that you've met on this conference, because we're all here because we believe in supporting each other. And I'm happy to connect with you. I want you to stay healthy and stay safe. And if you think a person might need help, tell them I'm here for you. These are some resources that have helped me. Maybe they'll help you, and offer to be there for them. So I want you to help us to break that stigma and to embrace mental health as survivors. So I wanted to end my presentation, my formal presentation there, because I wanted Dara to be able to ask me some questions that we talked about the other day, and maybe it might be more beneficial. But oh my gosh, you guys are killing me with the hearts. Thank you.
And you can send comments too, Nina. I mean, this is very powerful because it is so personal to you and personal in a personal life as well as a professional life. I could only imagine that your dad is looking down right now, just smiling and gleaming with pride of his daughter. You know, I mean, this
Thanks.
people don't know, but it's been within the last month that you lost your dad. So you being on here and being able to do this presentation is really incredible and shows a testament to your strength. Thank you for doing this today. I do have a couple of questions for you, and I'm sure other people may have here too, and they could
Hmm.
type in here as well, so we could ask you these, or you could respond to them. But
Okay.
often in the first responder world, especially for women in law enforcement, we
Hmm.
hear a very common, and I'll say this is in the firefighter world as well, and EMT, is
Hmm.
that women have to work twice as hard to prove their worth and value than a man would. How has
Yeah.
that played a part in your career and, as you have thrived to such high levels and being responsible for 4,300 kids and later on in the school systems and doing safe schools? I'll let you answer that part.
Yeah, it definitely played a factor. I mean, being a female in a male-dominated profession when I came on, I'll give you kind of a perspective. When I would go into a briefing, there would be 100 officers, and I would be the only female in the room. That's what I came into. Now, mind you, I grew up a tomboy, and so I always had more male friends than I had female friends. So this didn't seem very foreign to me. But I did find that there was, some hidden expectations. And they even started with my interview. My interview for the agent position was a 3-hour interview. I have never to this day met anyone else that had a 3-hour interview to become an agent. And so it really speaks to what they needed to know. But I really attribute it to ignorance of what is reality. And I don't look at it as malice. I didn't look at the 3-hour interview as malice. I looked at it like they really want to know. I'm breaking some ground here in Sacramento. I'm the 50th in the United States. They need to know that they're making the right choice and selecting the best person for the job, not a male, not a female, but the best person for the job. And so they would ask me unbelievable questions, but I it didn't matter to me. I was prepared. I told them that I was here for a career, not a job. A job is something that you can change, right? A career is something you stay with. And I told them I will retire as an ATF agent. 25 years later, I did.
That's incredible. And the other thing too that happens on a lot of people's careers is that they end up getting IAs or write-ups throughout their career, and almost unheard of that you would go through a law enforcement career and not be written up for something, you know? Did you manage to get through your career without having suffered the consequences of that?
That's a great question. One of there were awards that I wanted to achieve during my career. One of them was called the Gallatin Award, and it was an award that you would receive if you never had sustained any internal affairs actions. One of them was the James Little Concern for People Award, and that was your community work. And the third one was the Distinguished Service Medal. And I was fortunate to receive the Distinguished Service Medal the same year that I was nominated for the James Little Concern for People Award. And they gave me one of the awards, the Distinguished Service Medal, because they didn't want to give one recipient two awards. But in my eyes, I had achieved that. And when I looked at the Gallatin Award, I started off as a Treasury agent. So I worked under the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms under the Department of Treasury. And then later we went over to the Department of Justice and we became the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So when I retired, I was so disappointed that I wasn't going to get that, never sustaining any internal affairs action. But I knew that I had done it in 25 years and I was really proud of it.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Nina is planning a trip to Hawaii soon, and I wouldn't tell you when, but she's planning a trip soon. And one of the things that she told me when we were chatting on the phone is that she still has to give back to communities, especially to Maui when she travels there. And I told her, I said, do not go and do anything at all. Take a break. You need to take a break.
Mhm.
But it's not in your DNA, and I know it's not in your DNA to not give. But how can you practice that? How could you help others to practice that? Where, we're all givers. We want to give, we want to help, right?
Yeah.
When does it become okay to not do that? Because I don't know if you could answer that for yourself even.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you said that. I hadn't even shared that with my husband yet. He's expecting to do that day of service with me. But you really hit the nail on the head where I have this need to give back. I am so blessed in my life, and I want to be able to give back to people who take care of other people. That's so important to me, right? And so, you put it into perspective, Dara, when you told me that I need to take some time for my life. And when I talk about tapping out and taking time away, I literally don't think of that as tapping out. I think of that as something I enjoy, right? But realizing too that it does have an impact on our family. And a lot of what I do, my family, my entire family work cops and kids, from my husband to my son to my daughters. They all were involved as camp counselors, coaches. I involve my family with whatever I do. So my husband is expecting to do this day of service in Maui. So, it's really ingrained in a lot of what we do. I think that I'm going to scale it back a little bit, thinking about what I would do. But um, I think that part of the joy of giving is that I enjoy that so much. It's almost a personal thing to me to be able to give to people because it makes me feel good inside. It's almost selfish in a way, but I'm gonna try.
Well, and I know, thank you, Nina. I know that when we were starting to talk about this presentation and this slideshow that you shared, culturally is very difficult for you because in your cultural background, you don't gloat, you don't share positives, you don't talk about yourself in any kind of light. And so this was a very challenging presentation for you to do, especially given that cultural background, yes?
Oh, 100%. I can tell you that I've been presenting for 37 years. I don't think I've ever thought so much about a presentation in my entire life. And really because it's very raw. It goes to my heart. It exposes what some people, to be vulnerable is very difficult, and to be vulnerable in a very open way, in a way that all the people that are attending this conference can see and hear what my most inner thoughts were. Um, it is challenging, but it's also really cathartic. And that's why I love this forum that you have of different presenters coming on, because guess what? We learn so much more from each other than we do for other people, right? And that's what I think the beauty is of your collective here is that we learn from each other. None of us are perfect. And how we weather our storms can maybe help other people weather their storms. And that's really what it's about.
That's well said, Nina. I don't know if you are able to see the question and answer box. You should be able to.
Uh,
Um, we
the chat. Okay, so
not
so
not
if I can go,
there's also a Q&A box as well. It says Q&A below. And what
uh,
you
you
could
know what? I don't see it. Can you read a couple to me? I'm sorry.
yeah, sure. One of them says, what is the best strategy to help law enforcement officers or fire members open up when they are struggling? Oftentimes, the only answer they give is, I'm okay, as you mentioned, but it doesn't
Mhm.
always seem like they are okay.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes, sharing with others, just say, um, how are you feeling today? And if you sense that they're not feeling good, or even if you don't have to ask, if you can see by their actions that something's going on with them, you can say, we're all going through a kind of difficult time right now. And I remember when I was going through this time, and you share just kind of a snippet about things that happen in your life. And it shows them that you have a kryptonite too, right? That you have something inside you that um, that they can resonate with. and that they can feel like they can open up to you a little bit. And that's the door that you go into to say, hey, I've been here before. If you ever need help or want to talk, you just want somebody to listen. You know, I tell people, I don't think I can fix your problem. I can hear it. I can be here with you. I can help you with resources, and we can get through this together if you like. But you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to be shy about it. Ashamed is not, it's a harsh word too, because people think ashamed implies you did something wrong. You don't have, you didn't do something wrong when you're ashamed. Sometimes it's just the way you were brought up, right? It's the culture that you were brought up in to not share that you have problems or that you're weak.
Yeah, thank you. Next
Yeah.
question. I know that we have to get to a break, but I'll
Okay.
just ask you a couple more questions.
Mhm.
How could you convince someone that they need mental health help when they don't think they need it? Which seems to be, Muriel is asking this from Suriname. She said it's an issue that's going on in her country with her police department, with her police
Yeah.
force.
I would do frequent check-ins. And I say frequent check-ins because there are times where you don't see somebody for a while and you notice that they're taking more leave, or they're this kind of disconnected at work, right? Or they're not themselves. They maybe are they snap a little bit, or they're having problems at home. It's a really good indicator that there's some other things going on in their life that maybe they need some time to either talk to somebody, to open up to. But it is really difficult when somebody is closed, because it was me, and it was me twice, because
Yeah.
they were very different times. Just realizing that people can go through different types of trauma, and they have different types of reactions. And
Mhm.
so it's not a one stop fits all, right? It's going to be a number of different things. And that's why I tell people to build that tool chest up, put those things in there that you can draw upon when you need to.
Good advice. Did you ever come to a point where you wanted to do another job?
No,
All
no.
right.
If anything, I can tell you a recent conversation I had with one of my best friends growing up. She's an MSW therapist, and I told her, when I went into law enforcement, she thought, "You're crazy, all the stuff that you go through," and she followed everything that I went through in my career on the backside, right? And she would tell me, "I can't believe you do the things that you do." And now I tell her, "I can't believe the things you do as a therapist." You have a different appreciation, a different um, aspect, a different way to look. You look through a different lens to see who she is now. And what you do, Dara, and so many of the people out there right now is so vitally important, especially in the climate that we live in right now.
Lena, thank you so much, my friend. You and I will chat more later on, but thank you very much for being a part of this conference and for sharing your mana and your thoughts and all of your heart with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I left my contact information for the future if anybody needs to get a hold of me and wants to chat.
Thanks, Lena. See you later.
Okay. Mahalo.
Okay.